The Echo in the Garden. Chapter 1, The Stranger at the Gate. Astoria, Oregon, 2025. The salty tang of the Pacific Northwest air, a perpetual companion in this quaint coastal town, carried the scent of pine and damp earth into Sarah Harding's small, meticulously kept garden. At 70, Sarah moved with a deliberate grace, her silver hair often tied back with a silk scarf, her hands still strong and nimble, stained with paint or potting soil. A retired art restorer, she lived a quiet, solitary life in her charming Victorian house, a sanctuary filled with books, canvases, and the ghosts of a past she rarely revisited. Her days were a comforting rhythm of painting, tending her roses, and long walks along the rugged coastline. She had no children, a choice she'd made in her youth, focusing instead on her career, her art, and her independence. It was a life of quiet contentment, free from the chaotic demands of family. This tranquil rhythm shattered in a crisp autumn afternoon. Sarah was pruning her prize-winning hydrangeas, lost in the vibrant blues and purples, when a shadow fell across her path. She looked up, expecting a delivery person or perhaps a neighbor. Instead, a woman stood at her garden gate, her silhouette stark against the late afternoon sun. The woman was perhaps 40, her face etched with a weariness that belied her age. Her dark hair was pulled back carelessly, and her clothes, though clean, seemed to have seen better days. But it was the child beside her who truly caught Sarah's eye. A boy, no older than 10, clutched the woman's hand. He had wide, intelligent eyes, a smattering of freckles across his nose, and a shock of sandy blonde hair that caught the light. Sarah felt an inexplicable jolt, a flicker of recognition she couldn't place, as if looking at a familiar face in an old, forgotten dream. "Can I help you?" Sarah asked. Her voice calm, though a prickle of unease had begun to creep up her spine. Strangers rarely ventured down her secluded lane. The woman pushed open the gate, her gaze intense, unwavering, fixed on Sarah's face. She stepped into the garden, pulling the boy gently behind her. Her voice when she spoke was raspy, laced with a raw emotion that sent a shiver down Sarah's arm. "Are you Sarah Harding?" "Yes, I am," Sarah confirmed, her hand unconsciously tightening on her pruning shears. A beat of heavy silence stretched between them, punctuated only by the distant cry of gulls. The boy, Caleb, as Sarah would soon learn, stared at her with an unnerving intensity, his eyes mirroring the woman's. Then the woman took a deep, shuddering breath, her shoulders trembling. "My name is Evelyn," she said, her voice dropping to a near whisper, yet each word landed like a stone. "And you stole him from me 40 years ago." Sarah stared, bewildered. "I don't understand. Stole who? What are you talking about?" Her mind raced, trying to grasp the accusation, searching for any flicker of memory that could connect her to this stranger, this impossible claim. 40 years ago? She had been in her 30s, living in San Francisco, deeply immersed in her career. Her life then had been structured, predictable, and certainly not involved in anything remotely resembling stealing a child. Evelyn's eyes, suddenly brimming with tears, flicked from Sarah to the boy, then back again. "This is Caleb," she stated, her voice thick with emotion, "and he is my son, and your grandson. You took him from me, Sarah. You took my baby 40 years ago, and I have spent my entire life looking for him." The words hung in the sun-drenched air, shattering the peaceful afternoon. Sarah felt a dizzying disorientation. Grandson? Her? It was impossible. She had never been pregnant, never given birth. Her life had always been distinctly child-free. This woman was clearly delusional, perhaps distraught. Madam, Sarah said, trying to maintain her composure, though her heart had begun to pound erratically against her ribs. I think you have made a terrible mistake. I have never had a child. I've never been pregnant. I assure you, you have the wrong person. Evelyn let out a bitter, disbelieving laugh, a harsh sound that grated on Sarah's ears. The wrong person. After all these years, after everything I've been through, I've searched for decades. I know exactly who you are, Sarah Harding, and I know what you did. She reached into a worn canvas bag slung over her shoulder and pulled out a faded, creased photograph. She held it out to Sarah. Take a look at this. Tell me you don't recognize him. Sarah took the photograph, her fingers trembling slightly. It was an old, black and white picture, clearly from the late 1970s or early 80s. It showed a young woman, perhaps in her late teens or early 20s, with long, dark hair, cradling a newborn baby in a hospital bed. The baby was tiny, swaddled in a blanket, its face blurred. But what made Sarah gasp, what made the blood drain from her face, was the young woman's face. Despite the poor quality, despite the passage of time, Sarah recognized her immediately. It was Evelyn, a younger, more vibrant Evelyn, but undoubtedly her. And the baby, a sickening dread began to pool in Sarah's stomach. And this, Evelyn said, her voice rising now, filled with a desperate conviction. This is from my mother's diary, her last entry before she died. She wrote it for me. She told me everything. She pulled out a small, leather-bound notebook, its pages yellowed with age, and flipped it open to a marked page. She wrote about how you came to the hospital, how you claimed my baby, how they told her he was stillborn. But she saw you. She saw you take him. Sarah felt the ground beneath her feet give way. Her head spun. Hospital. The word echoed in her mind, triggering a faint, unsettling tremor. 40 years ago, San Francisco. There had been a hospital. A dark, terrifying period she had mostly suppressed, blurred by illness and medication. A severe, life-threatening infection. She remembered being very sick, fading in and out of consciousness. The doctors had told her. What had they told her? Something about a procedure. Something about a grave risk. But never a baby. Never a pregnancy. She looked at Caleb again, truly looked at him. And the jolt returned, sharper this time. His eyes, the shape of his nose, the way his sandy hair fell across his forehead. It was uncanny, a shocking, undeniable resemblance, not to Evelyn, but to a face Sarah had only ever seen in old family albums, the faces of her own ancestors, a lineage she had thought ended with her. I don't remember, Sarah stammered, her voice barely audible. I was very sick, in San Francisco, 40 years ago. But a baby? It's impossible. Evelyn stepped closer, her eyes blazing with a fierce, unwavering belief. It's not impossible, Sarah. It happened, and you owe me the truth. You owe Caleb the truth. He deserves to know his real family, his real mother, and his grandmother. The accusation, once so outlandish, now reverberated with a chilling possibility. The tranquil garden, her safe haven, had been invaded by a past she couldn't grasp, a truth she couldn't comprehend. The echo of Evelyn's words, "You stole him from me," bounced off the quiet walls of Sarah's perfect, solitary life, threatening to dismantle everything she thought she knew about herself. The stranger at the gate had not just brought an accusation. She had brought a fragment of a lost memory, a terrifying, impossible truth that threatened to unravel the very fabric of Sarah Harding's carefully constructed world. Chapter 2: A Flickering Shadow of Memory. The confrontation with Evelyn left Sarah's world reeling. The peaceful rhythm of her days was replaced by a chaotic symphony of doubt, fear, and a desperate need for answers. The image of Caleb's face, so uncannily familiar, haunted her. His eyes, her grandmother's eyes. It was a resemblance that pricked at her deepest, most repressed memories, stirring a forgotten fear from decades ago. She sat for hours in her living room, the faded photograph of Evelyn and the baby clutched in her trembling hand. The diary entry, though Evelyn had only let her glimpse it, had mentioned a hospital, San Francisco, 40 years ago. Sarah had been in San Francisco in 1985. She was 30 years old, immersed in her art restoration career, vibrant and independent. And then the illness, a sudden, severe infection. Peritonitis, they called it. She remembered the blinding pain, the rush to the hospital, the terrifying sense of her body betraying her. She remembered the doctors' grave faces, the hushed conversations, the sense of falling into a deep, dark well of unconsciousness. She remembered waking up, weak and disoriented, the feeling of tubes and needles, and she remembered a profound, aching emptiness, a sensation of something vital having been surgically removed, beyond the physical pain. But she had attributed that to the trauma of the illness itself. She had been told she was lucky to be alive. No mention of a pregnancy, no mention of a baby, never. She had always believed she was barren, a quiet acceptance born from years of never conceiving, and a deep-seated belief that motherhood wasn't her path. The notion of a secret pregnancy, let alone a baby stolen from another, was so utterly alien to her carefully constructed reality. Evelyn had left, promising to return the next day with more evidence, her voice unwavering in its conviction. Sarah knew she had to act. She couldn't simply dismiss Evelyn as delusional. The resemblance of Caleb, the chilling diary entry, the undeniable fact of her own severe illness in San Francisco at that exact time, it was too much to ignore. She started by digging through old boxes in her attic. Boxes filled with forgotten photographs, letters, and mementos from her San Francisco days. She found old address books, utility bills, a few faded postcards from friends. Nothing that immediately pointed to a pregnancy or hospital stay. But then, tucked inside an old leather-bound photo album, she found it. A small, crumpled hospital wristband. Her name, the date, July 1985, St. Francis Memorial Hospital, San Francisco. It was real. The hospital stay was undeniable. Her next step was more difficult. She needed to speak to someone who knew her from that time. Someone who might remember details blurred by her illness. Her closest friends from San Francisco had long since moved away or passed on. But then a name surfaced in her memory, Dr. Ben Carter. He had been her general practitioner, a kind, older man who had referred her to the specialists at St. Francis. He would be old now if he was even still alive. Sarah's hands trembled as she searched for Dr. Carter's name online. To her surprise, he was not only alive, but still practicing part-time in a small clinic in San Francisco, now semi-retired. She found his number, took a deep breath, and dialed. Dr. Carter's office, a pleasant voice answered. "Hello," Sarah said, her voice catching slightly. "My name is Sarah Harding. I was a patient of Dr. Carter's, back in the mid-'80s. I know this is a long shot, but I was hoping to speak with him about a medical matter from that time. A pause. Let me check, Miss Harding. He does take a few calls for old patients. Sarah waited, her heart pounding. The past, once a neatly sealed box, was beginning to creak open, releasing a cold, disorienting mist. Moments later, Dr. Carter's voice, older but still warm and familiar, came onto the line. Sarah Harding? My goodness, it's been decades. How are you, dear? I remember you. Bright young woman, quite the artist. Hello, Dr. Carter, Sarah replied, a strange mix of relief and dread washing over her. I'm doing well, thank you. But I need to ask you about something that happened when I was so ill, back in '85. At St. Francis Memorial. There was a subtle shift in Dr. Carter's tone, a slight hesitation. Ah, yes, a very serious peritonitis, if I recall. You were quite touch and go there, Sarah. A very difficult time. Dr. Carter. Sarah plunged in, her voice trembling. Was I pregnant when I was admitted? The silence on the other end of the line was thick, absolute. Sarah held her breath, every nerve ending screaming. Finally, Dr. Carter spoke, his voice unusually low, hesitant. Sarah, I can't discuss patient information over the phone, and that was a very long time ago. My records from that era, they might not be complete. Please, Dr. Carter, Sarah pleaded, desperation creeping into her voice. This is urgent. My entire life, my past, it's being questioned. A woman came to my house. She claims I had a baby, my baby, and that it was taken from her. She says it was a boy. She even brought a photograph. There was another long pause, then a sigh, a heavy, weary sigh. Sarah, Dr. Carter said, his voice laced with a profound sadness. This is a very delicate matter, and it involves other parties. I truly cannot say anything over the phone. Perhaps you should come to San Francisco. We could talk in person. His reluctance, his evasiveness spoke volumes. It was not a denial. It was a confirmation of sorts, a flickering shadow of memory that suggested a hidden truth, a secret buried deep within the past. Sarah felt a cold knot of fear tighten in her stomach. The impossible was slowly, terrifyingly becoming plausible. The echoes of Evelyn's words, "You stole him from me," were no longer just an accusation. They were a chilling whisper of a forgotten reality, an unresolved trauma that had been silently reverberating through her life for 40 years. The past was not just knocking at her door, it was tearing down the walls. Chapter 3. The Confession of a Quiet Conscience. The next morning, Evelyn arrived at Sarah's house, precisely as promised. She carried a worn backpack and the leather-bound diary Sarah had glimpsed the day before. Her expression was less accusatory now, more weary, tinged with a fragile hope. Caleb, clutching a worn teddy bear, stood quietly beside her. Dr. Carter asked me to come to San Francisco, Sarah stated, her voice calm despite the storm raging inside her. He wouldn't tell me anything over the phone, but his reaction, it spoke volumes. So, tell me everything, Evelyn, from the beginning. Show me your proof. Evelyn nodded, her eyes wide, glistening. She settled at Sarah's kitchen table, Caleb perched on a chair beside her, absorbing every word. My mother's name was Loretta, Evelyn began, her voice soft, almost a whisper, as if unveiling a sacred secret. She was a single mother, very young. She worked as a waitress. Struggling to make ends meet, she lived in a small apartment in a rough part of San Francisco. Evelyn opened the diary. The pages were yellowed, The ink faded, but the handwriting was neat, meticulous. "She wrote this for me," Evelyn said, her voice thick with emotion. "Her last wish was for me to find my brother." She began to read from the diary, her voice breaking occasionally. July 15th, 1985. "The pain started again today. Worse this time. I'm so scared, so alone. I feel him kicking, strong and healthy. My little boy. I try to be brave for him." July 18th, 1985. Rush to St. Francis Memorial. "They say I'm hemorrhaging. Preeclampsia. It's too early. Only 30 weeks. They're taking the baby by emergency C-section. Praying, praying, praying." Evelyn paused, tears welling in her eyes. Sarah listened, a cold dread tightening in her chest. 30 weeks, preeclampsia, C-section. These were medical terms. This was real. Evelyn continued reading, her voice now a desperate plea. July 19th, 1985. Woke up, excruciating pain. My baby. Where is my baby? They told me he was stillborn. Too fragile, too early. I saw him. Just a glimpse. His tiny hand. He was alive. I know he was. And then, a nurse came. Her name is Marilyn. She looked so sad. She said it was a mercy. But then I saw another woman. Her. Tall, silver hair. Dark eyes, so distinctive. She was with Dr. Carter. She was holding my baby, my stillborn baby, and she looked at me just for a second. There was such a strange look in her eyes. Not grief. Something else. Like she had won. I was weak. They gave me more medication. I couldn't move. I couldn't scream. I saw her walk away with him. My baby. My son. They took him. She took him. And they told me he was dead. I never saw him again. Evelyn closed the diary, her face streaked with tears. My mother spent the rest of her life trying to find him. She reported it, but she was a young, single mother. They dismissed her as delusional, hysterical. She had no money, no power. She was fighting a system that didn't believe her. She died last year, never knowing what happened to her son. But she told me everything, every detail. She made me promise to find him, to find the woman who took him. Sarah sat motionless, stunned. Marilyn, Dr. Carter, the tall woman with silver hair and dark eyes. It fit, all of it. Her mind, once a blank slate regarding that period, was now flooded with fragmented, horrifying images. The blur of medication, the profound emptiness, the feeling of something being taken. She remembered Dr. Carter's visit to her room, his face grave. She remembered him telling her about the severity of her peritonitis, the desperate measures they had taken. And she remembered him saying, "Sarah, there was an unexpected complication during the surgery. We had to act very quickly. It was a very close call. You're very lucky to be alive." She had taken it as confirmation of the surgical trauma, the near-death experience. But what if it was more? What if the unexpected complication wasn't just about her body, but about another body, a life within her that she hadn't even known existed? The pieces began to click into place, forming a terrifying mosaic. Her chronic fatigue for months leading up to the hospitalization, her inexplicable weight gain dismissed as stress eating, her unusually swollen ankles, all the subtle signs of a pregnancy. She had been too focused on her career, too disconnected from her own body, too perhaps in denial to notice. She had been so fiercely independent, so convinced she was without maternal instincts. The idea of carrying a child without realizing it, of being so profoundly disconnected from her own body, was devastating, but it was not impossible. Some women, in severe emotional or psychological states, or under extreme stress, experienced cryptogenic pregnancies. A profound, sickening realization washed over her. She had been pregnant. She had given birth, and her baby, her son, had been taken from her, just as Loretta's had been. Two mothers, unknowingly linked by a shared tragedy, a shared loss, both victims of a cruel deception. "My God," Sarah whispered, tears streaming down her face. Not tears of remorse for taking a child, but tears of a different kind of anguish. The anguish of a mother discovering a child she never knew existed, a life stolen from her, just as it had been stolen from Evelyn's mother. "My God, Evelyn, I think I was pregnant. I think they told me my baby died too. I think they told me I never even had a baby, that it was all a complication of my illness." Evelyn stared at her, her eyes wide. "What?" "I was so sick," Sarah continued, her voice raw with grief and shock. "They said it was peritonitis, a severe infection. They almost lost me. I was in a coma for days. When I woke up, I was so weak, so disoriented. Dr. Carter told me there was an unexpected complication, a close call. I thought he meant my own survival. I thought I had accepted that I was barren. I never suspected." The confession hung in the air, a raw, painful truth. Two women, linked not by Sarah's malicious theft, but by a shared, horrifying deception. Two mothers, robbed of their children by a conspiracy, a decision made by others, for reasons still unknown. The initial accusation of theft had dissolved, replaced by a far more complex and devastating truth, a medical secret, a betrayal that echoed down 40 years, connecting their lives in a way neither could have ever imagined. The stolen child was not a result of a mother's cruelty, but a tragic, decades-old medical cover-up, a silent crime of immense proportions. Chapter 4, Unearthing the Deception. The truth, once so terrifying and impossible, now began to solidify for Sarah and Evelyn, a bitter, shared pill. They realized they weren't adversaries, but victims of a decades-old deception. The anger Evelyn had brought with her transformed into a desperate need for answers, a shared quest for justice. "We need to go to San Francisco," Sarah stated, her voice firm despite the tremor in her hands. "We need to speak to Dr. Carter in person, and we need to find Marilyn." Evelyn nodded, her face grim. "I'll book us tickets. Caleb, are you ready for an adventure?" Caleb, quiet and observant, simply squeezed his mother's hand, his eyes still holding that uncanny, familiar spark that resonated so deeply with Sarah. The journey to San Francisco felt like a descent into the past. Every street, every building triggered a new, fragmented memory for Sarah. The vibrant city she had loved, now tinged with the shadow of a hidden trauma. They arrived at St. Francis Memorial Hospital. It had been modernized, expanded, but the core structure, the hushed corridors, still carried the faint echo of her pain and disorientation. Dr. Carter's clinic was small, tucked away in a quiet street. He looked older, frailer, but his eyes, when he saw Sarah, were filled with a profound sadness. He recognized Evelyn immediately from her mother's persistent, decades-old inquiries. "Sarah, Evelyn, please, come in," he said, his voice weary. He led them to his small, cluttered office, the air thick with the scent of old books and antiseptic. He sat behind his desk, his shoulders slumped. "I know why you're here," Dr. Carter began, his voice barely a whisper. And I know you deserve the truth. It's been a burden I've carried for 40 years. He took a deep breath, his gaze meeting Sarah's, then Evelyn's. You were both patients at St. Francis Memorial in July of 1985. Loretta, a young woman with severe preeclampsia, was admitted in critical condition. Sarah, you were admitted for acute peritonitis, also critical. What none of us realized then, Sarah, was that you were also pregnant. A cryptic pregnancy. It's rare, but it happens, especially in cases of extreme stress or medical complications. You were close to 30 weeks along. Sarah gasped, the words confirming her darkest suspicion. Loretta gave birth to a healthy baby boy via emergency C-section. Dr. Carter continued, his voice heavy with regret. He was premature, yes, but strong. And you, Sarah, were rushed into emergency surgery for the peritonitis. During the surgery, there was a complication, a profound blood loss. You nearly died on the table. Your heart stopped for several minutes. When we stabilized you, we realized you had gone into labor. Unbeknownst to anyone, your body had been trying to expel the fetus, even as we fought for your life. A sickening wave of understanding washed over Sarah. Her body, fighting for survival, simultaneously bringing a life into the world she didn't even know she carried. Your baby boy was born, Dr. Carter said, his voice cracking. He was full term but tiny, small for gestational age due to your illness. But he was alive, breathing, a fighter. And then the decision was made by a senior doctor, Dr. Peterson, who is now deceased. He looked at Loretta, a single mother, struggling, unstable, with a premature baby. And he looked at you, Sarah, a professional woman believed to be barren who had just faced a near-fatal surgery. He saw an opportunity. Evelyn gasped, a choked sound. An opportunity for what? For what he called a better life for both babies, Dr. Carter admitted, his voice thick with shame. He convinced Marilyn, the head nurse, to go along with it. Loretta's healthy baby was declared stillborn. They told her there were complications with the C-section, that the baby didn't survive. And your baby, Sarah, your healthy full-term baby, was given to Loretta as her own, a replacement for the one she supposedly lost. And you, Sarah, were told your complication was merely a surgical one, that you had never been pregnant. They erased your pregnancy from your records, falsified reports. They covered it up. Sarah stared at him, numb with shock, her baby given away to Evelyn's mother. The truth was far more twisted, far more cruel than she could have ever imagined. It wasn't a theft by her, but a forced exchange, a manipulation of two vulnerable women by a powerful, arrogant doctor playing God. So, Evelyn whispered, her voice trembling, my mother's baby. He was the one they told her died, and Sarah's baby was given to my mother. He was raised as my brother. He passed away a few years ago. Leukemia. He was only 37. The weight of this new information was crushing. Sarah's son, her firstborn, had lived a life she knew nothing about, and he was gone, before she ever had a chance to know him. The tears that flowed now were not just for her lost son, but for Loretta's lost son, for Evelyn's lost brother, for the ripple effect of one man's callous decision, one doctor's fatal flaw. What about my baby, Dr. Carter? Sarah asked, her voice a raw plea. The one given to Loretta, the one she raised as her own, the one who passed away? That baby, Sarah, Dr. Carter. Carter said, his eyes filled with profound regret, was your son, and he was Evelyn's half-brother. Your son grew up believing he was Loretta's. And you never knew he existed. Until now. The silence in the room was deafening, thick with the weight of 40 years of lies, of lost lives, of stolen identities. "And Caleb?" Evelyn asked, her voice barely audible. "My son, my Caleb, if he was my brother's son, then he is Sarah's grandson?" Dr. Carter nodded slowly. "Yes. Genetically, Caleb is Sarah's grandson. Your brother was Sarah's son, and Caleb is his son. It's a tragic, cruel irony that this boy, the spitting image of his grandmother, is the one who brought this all to light. A true echo in time. The truth was out. A quiet conscience, burdened for decades, had finally confessed. The deception, carefully constructed 40 years ago, had unraveled, revealing a horrifying tapestry of manipulation, loss, and the silent, enduring strength of blood, calling out across generations. The stolen child was neither stolen nor bought. He was exchanged. A life-altering trade made by callous hands, a truth that ripped open the past with brutal force, leaving two women to grapple with the devastating resonance of remembrance. The absent deed of her pregnancy, the hidden birth, had finally been unveiled, and with it, a new, complex family had been formed, born from tragedy and the ashes of buried secrets. Chapter 5. The Unseen Son and the Unveiling of Kin. The confession of Dr. Carter hung in the air, a devastating silence broken only by the quiet sniffles of Caleb, who, despite his young age, seemed to grasp the enormity of the unfolding family saga. Sarah and Evelyn sat across from each other, connected by a thread of shared trauma, both reeling from the revelation of an unseen son, a lost brother, a truth more complex and heartbreaking than any accusation of theft. "My son," Sarah whispered, the words tasting foreign, yet profoundly real. "I had a son, and he lived his life and died without me ever knowing." A wave of grief, sharp and potent, crashed over her. It was a grief for a stranger, a grief for a life she never witnessed, a mother's profound sorrow for a child she never got to hold, never got to raise. The images of Evelyn's baby photograph now took on a new, wrenching meaning. That tiny hand, the blurred face, it was her son, her firstborn. Evelyn, still processing the shock that the man she believed was her biological brother was in fact Sarah's son, found a new layer of sorrow. The brother she had loved, now revealed as the son of the woman she had once accused of theft. The complexities were staggering, but then her gaze fell on Caleb. He was her solace, her undeniable link to this new, astonishing truth. "We need a DNA test," Evelyn said, her voice firm, cutting through the emotional haze. "For Caleb, to confirm." Dr. Carter nodded. "Of course. It's the only way to be absolutely certain. I can arrange it immediately." The DNA test was performed that very afternoon. A quick swab of Caleb's cheek, a simple blood sample from Sarah. The waiting period, Dr. Carter explained, would be a few days. Days that stretched into an eternity for Sarah and Evelyn, suspended between the incredible weight of the truth and the need for irrefutable scientific confirmation. During this waiting period, Sarah and Evelyn began to talk, truly talk, for the first time. They shared stories, tentative at first, then with a growing openness. Evelyn spoke of her mother, Loretta, her unwavering conviction that her baby had been stolen, her decades-long search, her dying wish for Evelyn to find her brother. Sarah listened, tears welling in her eyes, understanding the immense pain Loretta must have carried, the injustice she had faced alone. Sarah, in turn, spoke of her own life, her career, her carefully constructed independence, and the profound, aching emptiness she had sometimes felt. An emptiness she had always attributed to her childless state, never imagining it was the void left by a son stolen from her without her knowledge. She recounted the blur of her illness, the strange, disorienting sensation of waking up after surgery, the vague feeling of something missing, something profoundly altered within her body, dismissed by Dr. Carter as simply the aftermath of a severe medical trauma. They discussed Dr. Peterson, the deceased doctor who had orchestrated the deception. His motives, as Dr. Carter had explained, seemed rooted in a twisted sense of paternalistic control, a belief that he knew best, that he could improve the lives of these children by placing them in what he deemed more suitable homes. It was a horrifying reflection of a medical era where power often eclipsed ethics. Evelyn also shared memories of her brother, Sarah's son. She spoke of his kindness, his quiet nature, his love for books, a trait that resonated deeply with Sarah, the librarian. She showed Sarah photographs, a chubby-cheeked baby, a gangly teenager, a thoughtful young man, a husband, a father. Sarah looked at these images of her son, a lifetime unfolding before her eyes, a lifetime she had missed. The joy of seeing him, the profound sadness of knowing he was gone, intertwined in her heart. And Caleb, Sarah watched him, the boy who carried the undeniable echoes of her own family. He was observant, bright, his eyes constantly taking everything in. He had a quiet intensity, a thoughtful demeanor that reminded Sarah of herself at his age. She found herself reaching out to him, offering a gentle touch, a comforting word. He, in turn, began to gravitate towards her, drawn by an invisible thread of kinship, perhaps recognizing something in her that resonated deep within his own nascent identity. 3 days later, the call came from Dr. Carter. The DNA results were in. "Sarah," he said, his voice gentle, "the results are conclusive. Caleb is indeed your grandson, a perfect match." The scientific confirmation, while expected, still hit Sarah with a wave of profound emotion. It was real. This boy, this quiet, observant child, was her flesh and blood, a direct link to the son she never knew. And Evelyn, the woman who had arrived at her gate with an accusation, was now revealed to be her daughter by blood and by shared tragedy. Evelyn, the daughter of Loretta, who had raised Sarah's son. The layers of this family tapestry were bewildering, heartbreaking, and astonishing. Evelyn, when she heard the news, simply wept, tears of relief and exhaustion. "He's my son, and he's your grandson, Mom," she whispered, the word mom feeling both alien and utterly right. The initial bitterness of the accusation had been replaced by a fragile, undeniable bond, forged in shared pain and the profound truth of their unexpected kinship. The path ahead was still uncertain. There were so many years of lost time, so many unspoken words, so much grief to process. But as Sarah looked at Evelyn, her daughter, and at Caleb, her grandson, a flicker of hope ignited within her. The unseen son had finally been seen, in the living embodiment of his own son. And in the unveiling of this complex, heartbreaking family, a new chapter had begun, a chance to weave new threads of love and connection into a tapestry forever marked by loss, but now, finally, woven with the resonance of remembrance and the promise of a future, shared and truly, for the first time, understood. Chapter 6. The Architect of Silence. With the DNA confirmation, the reality of their interconnected lives settled over Sarah and Evelyn with a profound weight. Their shared pain now had a name: Dr. Peterson, the deceased architect of silence, the man who had played God with their lives, had inadvertently shaped their destinies in the most unimaginable ways. While he was beyond reproach, his actions demanded a deeper understanding, a dismantling of the carefully constructed facade that had hidden his truth for decades. Sarah, with Evelyn and Dr. Carter's help, began to investigate Dr. Peterson. They discovered he had been a highly respected, almost revered figure in the San Francisco medical community of the 1980s. A brilliant, charismatic surgeon known for his innovative techniques and, chillingly, for his almost messianic belief in his own judgment. He was known to have strong opinions about eugenics, about improving society through strategic planning, ideas that were quietly gaining traction in certain medical circles at the time. This shed a disturbing light on his motives. It wasn't just a misguided attempt to help. It was an ideological conviction that gave him the right to decide who raised whom, who deserved what kind of life. They also discovered that Dr. Peterson had been involved in other, less ethical medical practices, though none as blatant or as devastating as the one affecting Sarah and Evelyn. There were whispers of questionable adoptions arranged privately, bypassing standard legal channels, and unconfirmed reports of difficult patients, particularly those from lower socioeconomic backgrounds, being subtly steered towards certain outcomes. The medical community, it seemed, had often turned a blind eye to his more unconventional methods, blinded by his brilliance and reputation. Marilyn, the head nurse mentioned in Loretta's diary, was still alive, living in a quiet retirement community just outside San Francisco. Dr. Carter, armed with the undeniable DNA results and the weight of his own long-held guilt, agreed to accompany Sarah and Evelyn to confront her. Marilyn was frail, her memory a little hazy, but the moment she saw Dr. Carter, a flicker of fear, then profound regret, crossed her face. The name Loretta, and then Sarah, seemed to awaken a deep-seated shame. "It was Dr. Peterson," Marilyn whispered, her voice raspy. "He was so convincing. He said it was for the best, for both babies. Loretta, so young, so ill, no family. He said her baby was premature and too weak to survive. A compassionate lie, he called it. And Sarah, nearly dead, no family, no history of pregnancy. He said her body couldn't handle another trauma, that she wouldn't even remember. He wanted to give her baby a stable home. He was so powerful, so persuasive. I was young. I just followed orders. I truly believed. I believed it was a difficult but necessary decision." Her confession, though tinged with self-preservation, carried the weight of decades of guilt. She described how they had subtly altered records, how they had managed the transfers, ensuring no one would ever suspect. She revealed the inner workings of their deception, a carefully orchestrated scheme that exploited the vulnerability of two women and the unquestioning trust placed in a medical authority figure. For Sarah, listening to Marilyn's confession was like watching the final pieces of a dark puzzle click into place. The full horror of the situation, the cold, calculating nature of Peterson's actions became starkly clear. It wasn't just a mistake. It was a deliberate act of profound cruelty, a violation of human rights that spanned generations. Evelyn, however, felt a different kind of relief. Her mother, Loretta, had not been delusional. Her cries for her baby, her unwavering belief that he had been stolen, were validated. The truth, though painful, was also a powerful form of vindication for her mother's memory. "Did you know anything about the baby from Loretta?" Sarah asked Marilyn, her voice strained. "The one they said was stillborn?" Marilyn looked down, her face pale. "Dr. Peterson told me he had disposed of it, a quiet cremation, to spare Loretta further pain. He was very convincing." A new wave of horror washed over them. Loretta's baby, the healthy one, had been deliberately erased, his existence denied, his body disposed of, without his mother's knowledge or consent. This was not just about the exchange of children. It was about the cold, calculated extermination of a life. The ultimate act of control by a man who believed he held the power of life and death, of memory and oblivion. The sheer audacity, the cold-heartedness of Dr. Peterson's actions chilled them to the bone. He hadn't just manipulated circumstances. He had actively destroyed a life, covered up a birth, and robbed two mothers of their children, creating a ripple effect of pain that stretched across 40 years. The absent deed wasn't just a record of a stolen life. It was a testament to the chilling power of one man's unchecked ego, a secret crime hidden beneath the veneer of medical authority. Sarah and Evelyn realized the vastness of the injustice. They had proof, undeniable evidence of a massive medical cover-up. They consulted with a lawyer, a formidable woman specializing in medical ethics and historical cases. The lawyer confirmed that while Dr. Peterson was deceased, there were grounds to pursue a case against the hospital itself for its negligence in overseeing its staff and for the profound trauma inflicted upon multiple families. It was a long shot, given the time elapsed and the complexity of the case, but it was a path to seeking institutional accountability, a way to ensure that such a profound betrayal could never again happen under the guise of compassionate medical care. The architect of silence may be gone, but his echoes demanded a reckoning, a public unveiling of the truth that had shaped their lives in such devastating ways. Chapter 7. The Ripple Effect. The decision to pursue legal action against St. Francis Memorial Hospital, though daunting, brought a strange sense of purpose to Sarah and Evelyn. It wasn't about financial gain. It was about exposing the truth, about honoring the memory of Loretta, who had suffered in silence, and about preventing such medical hubris from ever happening again. Their story, once a private anguish, was about to become a public testament to the profound ripple effect of one man's deception. The media, always hungry for a compelling human interest story, caught wind of the brewing lawsuit. A major San Francisco newspaper ran an investigative piece detailing the shocking allegations. The story of two mothers, one unknowingly giving birth, the other told her healthy baby was stillborn, and their babies swapped by a morally bankrupt doctor, sent shockwaves through the city and the medical community. Sarah and Evelyn, initially hesitant, agreed to give interviews. Sarah, articulate and precise, explained her decades of believing she was barren, the vague sense of loss she had attributed to her illness, and the shattering realization of a son she never knew. Evelyn, passionate and raw, spoke of her mother Loretta's relentless, lonely search for her stolen child, and the vindication of finally proving her mother was not delusional. Caleb, though young, was always by Evelyn's side, his striking resemblance to Sarah, a silent, undeniable piece of the unfolding puzzle. The public reaction was immediate and overwhelming. Letters and emails poured in, many from other families who suspected similar medical misdeeds from the past, sharing their own stories of unexplained losses, strange adoptions, and dismissed concerns. The story resonated deeply, tapping into a collective fear of medical authority and the vulnerability of patients. The hospital, initially defensive, found itself under immense pressure. Its reputation, once pristine, was now tainted by the dark shadow of Dr. Peterson's actions. They denied institutional knowledge of the deception, blaming it solely on a rogue doctor. But the mounting public outcry, fueled by the compelling narrative of Sarah, Evelyn, and Caleb, forced their hand. The lawsuit became a powerful platform for advocacy. Sarah and Evelyn, supported by their determined lawyer, pressed for transparency, for a thorough review of past records, and for stricter ethical guidelines in medical practices. They demanded that the hospital acknowledge the profound wrong committed, not just against them, but against all the families potentially affected by similar deceptions. Throughout this arduous process, the bond between Sarah and Evelyn deepened. They spent countless hours together, sifting through documents, preparing for interviews, supporting each other through the emotional toll of revisiting such a painful past. Evelyn, once the stranger at the gate, was now undeniably Sarah's daughter. They shared not just blood, but a profound understanding forged in shared trauma and a common quest for justice. Caleb, meanwhile, thrived in the presence of his newfound grandmother. Sarah, though initially hesitant about the role, found an unexpected joy in nurturing him. She taught him to paint, to tend to her garden. She read him stories, her soothing voice filling the quiet rooms of her Astoria home. He called her Grandma Sarah, a title that, at first, felt foreign, then profoundly comforting. He was a vibrant, living link to the son she had lost, a tangible piece of the family she never knew she had. The legal battle stretched on, lengthy and emotionally draining. The hospital eventually offered a settlement, a significant sum of money, coupled with a formal, public apology. They established a new independent committee to review historical cases of suspected medical malfeasance and committed to stricter protocols for patient consent and record keeping. It was not a perfect victory, but it was a significant one. It brought a measure of institutional accountability and a validation of the profound suffering endured by families like theirs. Sarah and Evelyn chose not to take the monetary settlement for themselves. Instead, they used a portion of it to establish the Loretta Evelyn Foundation for Patient Advocacy, named in honor of Evelyn's mother. Its mission was to support individuals seeking answers about suspicious medical procedures, to provide legal aid, and to advocate for ethical reforms in healthcare. The remainder of the funds went into a trust for Caleb's future education. It was a powerful act of transformation, turning their personal pain into a legacy of purpose, a way to ensure that the ripple effect of Dr. Peterson's deception would, in the end, be a force for good. The media coverage eventually faded, but the story of Sarah, Evelyn, and Caleb, and the foundation they created, left an indelible mark. It sparked a broader conversation about medical ethics, patient rights, and the enduring power of family secrets. For Sarah, the journey had come full circle. The initial accusation of theft, the shocking revelation of her own lost child, the bitter pursuit of justice, it had all led her to this unexpected, profound destination: a daughter, a grandson, and a life imbued with new meaning and purpose. The absent deed of her first child's birth, once erased by deception, had been rewritten, not on paper, but in the living, breathing reality of a family reclaimed, a legacy forged from pain, and a future built on truth and the enduring power of love. The echoes of the past still resonated, but now they were not whispers of betrayal, but harmonies of healing and the quiet strength of remembrance. Chapter 8. Threads of Forgiveness. With the lawsuit settled and the Loretta Evelyn Foundation established, a new phase of life began for Sarah, Evelyn, and Caleb. The intense focus on justice and revelation slowly gave way to the quieter, more complex work of building a family, thread by delicate thread, after 40 years of separation. Sarah moved her old art restoration studio, a smaller version of her San Francisco space, into a bright room in her Astoria home. Evelyn, with a background in social work, dedicated herself to the foundation, working tirelessly to support other families searching for answers. Caleb, now blossoming, found stability and love in the quiet routine of his grandmother's home. The concept of forgiveness, once an abstract and distant idea for Sarah, slowly began to take shape. It wasn't a sudden epiphany, but a gradual process, like the slow opening of a tightly closed bloom. She had forgiven Dr. Carter, recognizing his decades of guilt and his courageous act of truth-telling. But forgiving the system, and more importantly, forgiving the cosmic injustice that had robbed her of a son and Evelyn of her brother, was a much harder task. She found solace in her art, her paintings, once meticulous restorations of others' works, now became profound expressions of her own inner landscape. She painted abstracts, swirling colors that captured the chaos and eventual calm of her journey. She painted portraits of light and shadow, capturing the complex emotions that now inhabited her heart. Her most frequent subject, though, was Caleb. She captured his quiet intensity, his bright eyes, the echo of her own family in his features. These portraits were not just likenesses. They were acts of profound love and acceptance, a visual record of the family she was building. Evelyn, too, grappled with forgiveness. Her initial rage towards Sarah had dissolved into profound empathy, but the bitterness towards Dr. Peterson and the system that had allowed him to operate with impunity remained. However, witnessing Sarah's quiet transformation, her unwavering dedication to the foundation, and her blossoming relationship with Caleb, Evelyn began to soften. She saw Sarah not as the perpetrator of a past wrong, but as a fellow victim, a woman who had lost just as much as she had. They started visiting Clara's grave, the son Sarah had never known. It was a small, unassuming headstone in a quiet cemetery outside San Francisco. They brought flowers, shared stories of what little they knew of his life, and allowed themselves to grieve together. It was a raw, painful ritual, but also deeply healing. It was a recognition of the lost life, a silent acknowledgement that he had existed, that he mattered. For Sarah, it was a profound act of motherhood, finally connecting with the son she had unknowingly carried, a bittersweet communion across the divide of death. For Evelyn, it was a way to honor her brother, to fill in the missing pieces of his life with his biological grandmother's presence. One evening, as Sarah tucked Caleb into bed, he looked up at her, his eyes wide. "Grandma Sarah?" he asked. "Why did the bad doctor do that?" Sarah paused, choosing her words carefully. "Sometimes, Caleb, people think they know best, even when they don't. Sometimes, they make very big mistakes that hurt a lot of people. But even when bad things happen, love always finds a way. And it brought you to me, didn't it?" Caleb nodded, snuggling into his pillow. "And I'm glad it did." His simple words were a balm to Sarah's soul. They encapsulated the fragile yet profound truth of their unexpected family. The forgiveness wasn't about erasing the past, but about integrating it into their present, finding the light amidst the shadows. The Loretta Evelyn Foundation continued to grow, providing hope and support to countless families. Sarah and Evelyn became a formidable team, a testament to the resilience of the human spirit. Their story, once a tale of bitter accusation, had transformed into a powerful narrative of redemption, a living example of how trauma, when faced with courage and vulnerability, could ultimately lead to profound connection and purpose. The absent deed of a son's birth, the hidden records, the stolen life, these were still a part of their history, but they no longer defined their present. Instead, they had become the fertile ground from which a new, unconventional family had bloomed, bound not just by blood, but by shared understanding, profound forgiveness, and the quiet, enduring resonance of remembrance. The echoes in the garden, once filled with the harsh accusations of a stranger, now harmonized with the sweet, gentle melody of a family, finally, truly, and irrevocably home. Chapter 9: The Garden of Healing. Astoria, Oregon, 2030. 5 years had passed since Evelyn arrived at Sarah's gate with her astonishing accusation. The initial shock, the legal battles, the painful revelations, all had settled into a profound, if still tender, part of their family history. Sarah, now 75, moved with a newfound lightness, her once solitary life enriched by the vibrant presence of Evelyn and Caleb. The Victorian house, once a quiet sanctuary for one, now hummed with the gentle rhythms of three. Caleb, a bright and thoughtful 15-year-old, spent his afternoons in Sarah's studio, sketching alongside her, or helping her tend the sprawling garden that had become their shared haven. The maple tree planted in memory of Sarah's son, Evelyn's brother, now cast a generous shadow, its leaves rustling with whispers of past and present. The Loretta Evelyn Foundation had grown beyond their wildest dreams. It was a beacon of hope for families grappling with similar historical medical injustices. Evelyn, as its tireless director, channeled her past pain into powerful advocacy, ensuring that no other mother would suffer the silent anguish her own mother, Loretta, had endured. Sarah served on the board, her wisdom and calm presence providing invaluable guidance. Their story, once sensationalized by the media, had become a quiet legend, a testament to the enduring power of truth and reconciliation. They no longer sought the limelight, preferring to focus their energies on the foundation and on their newly forged family bonds. The concept of home, for Sarah, had evolved profoundly. It was no longer just the physical house, though she cherished its every creak and sunlit corner. Home was the feeling of Caleb's hand in hers, the shared laughter with Evelyn over a cup of tea, the quiet moments of understanding exchanged across the garden path. It was the presence of love, forgiveness, and unconditional acceptance that now filled her life. Evelyn, too, had found a profound sense of home. Growing up with a mother consumed by a haunting secret, then carrying the weight of that search herself, she had lived a life of quiet desperation. Now, with Sarah, she had found not just a grandmother for Caleb, but a mother for herself. Their relationship, born from trauma, had blossomed into one of deep respect, shared purpose, and fierce, unwavering love. Caleb, perhaps more than anyone, embodied the healing that had taken place. He had grown up with a unique family narrative, one that he understood with an emotional maturity beyond his years. He was proud of his grandmothers, of their fight for justice, and of the foundation they had built. He carried the echoes of both families within him, a living bridge between the past sorrows and the present's profound joy. He was the tangible proof that even from the most devastating of lies, truth could emerge, and from the deepest wounds, new life could flourish. Sarah would often sit with Caleb on the garden bench beneath the maple tree. She would tell him stories of her life, of San Francisco, of her art, and sometimes, gently, she would speak of his grandfather, the son she never knew. She would describe the photographs Evelyn had shown her, painting a picture of a kind, thoughtful man, and expressing a quiet, bittersweet regret for the years lost. Caleb listened, absorbing these fragments of his lineage, weaving them into the rich tapestry of his identity. The small maple box, Clara's final, silent message, still rested on Sarah's bedside table. Its smooth, cool surface was a constant, gentle reminder of the complex journey that had brought them all here. It was a symbol of unspoken remorse, of a love that had found its way back, across the chasm of death and deceit. It reminded Sarah that even in the most broken relationships, there was always a possibility for understanding, for a profound form of peace. The absent deed, the one that had erased her pregnancy, denied her motherhood, and taken her child, had been replaced by a more powerful, invisible deed, the deed of unwavering love and the deed of profound forgiveness. It was a testament to the human capacity to heal, to adapt, and to find beauty in the most unexpected places. The echoes in the garden, once a cacophony of pain and accusation, now resonated with the harmonious symphony of a family truly found. The old Victorian house in Astoria, nestled by the sea, was no longer just Sarah Harding's home. It was the sacred space where a complex, beautiful family, born from the depths of deception, finally found its peace, its purpose, and its enduring, unbreakable bond. The past had cast a long shadow, but the present was bathed in the warm, golden light of healing, a testament to the extraordinary power of the human heart to transform sorrow into solace and an absent deed into a legacy of love. Chapter 10. The Resonance of Remembrance. As the years continued to unfurl, Sarah Harding reached her early 80s, her spirit as vibrant as the hydrangeas in her beloved garden. The lines etched around her eyes were not solely from age, but from the profound journey she had undertaken, a map of sorrow, resilience, and hard-won peace. Evelyn, now in her 50s, was a force of quiet strength, leading the Loretta Evelyn Foundation with unwavering dedication, her past pain having forged her into an empathetic advocate. Caleb, a young man of 20, was off at college, a testament to the new future that had been meticulously built from the ashes of old lies. The Astoria house, the initial battleground of accusation, had become the embodiment of a complex, beautiful truth. Its walls held not only Sarah's memories, but the newly woven tapestry of their family. The maple tree, planted in remembrance of the son Sarah never knew, and the brother Evelyn never truly had, now towered over the garden, its branches reaching skyward, a silent guardian of their story. Sarah often reflected on the profound meaning of home. It wasn't merely a structure or a location. It was the space created by connection, understanding, and the courageous embrace of vulnerability. Her home now resonated with shared laughter, quiet conversations, and the comfort of unconditional love. It was a living testament to the fact that even when the foundations of one's life are shattered by betrayal, new, stronger ones can be built from the fragments. The absent deed, The legal document that had marked her profound loss had transformed into a symbolic, ever-present deed, a testament to the enduring power of blood, the unbreakable thread that connected her to Evelyn and Caleb, and, through them, to the son she never knew. The trauma had left scars, but they were now scars of strength, reminders of a battle fought and won, not just in court, but in the deeper, more profound arena of the heart. Evelyn, on her regular visits, would sit with Sarah in the garden, their conversations flowing easily, touching on everything from Caleb's college life to the latest challenges at the foundation. The initial accusation that had brought them together now felt like a distant, painful dream, overshadowed by the reality of their shared present. Evelyn had finally found the mother she had subconsciously yearned for, and Sarah, the family she never knew she had. Their bond was a unique one, forged in the crucible of extraordinary circumstances, a testament to the resilience of the human spirit. Caleb's calls from college were a highlight for Sarah. He shared his academic triumphs, his new friendships, and his dreams for the future. He spoke of his grandma Sarah with profound affection and respect, a loving acknowledgement of the extraordinary woman who had welcomed him into her life, and in doing so, had healed a generational wound. He understood that his existence was a direct result of a grave injustice, but he also recognized that it had led to a powerful story of redemption and love. He carried the legacy of both his biological grandmothers, Loretta's fierce determination and Sarah's quiet strength. The maple box, Clara's final unspoken message, remained on Sarah's bedside table. She would often hold it, its smooth wood a tactile connection to the complex daughter who had caused her so much pain, yet had offered a glimpse of remorse in her last act. It was a reminder that even in the most fractured relationships, there could be a bridge, a subtle gesture of understanding across the chasm. Forgiveness, Sarah had realized, was not about forgetting, but about transcending. It was about choosing peace over bitterness, compassion over resentment. Sarah's life had become a living embodiment of this transcendence. She continued her art, now creating pieces that celebrated the intricate beauty of human connection, the subtle interplay of light and shadow in relationships, the profound resilience of the heart. Her art became a narrative of her own journey, a visual poem of a life broken and then exquisitely reassembled. The whispers in the garden, once filled with the harsh echoes of a stranger's accusation, now resonated with the gentle hum of remembrance, of love that had weathered the storm, and of a family, unconventional yet profoundly connected, finding its enduring harmony. Sarah Harding, the woman who thought she was alone, had found her lineage, her purpose, and her profound sense of belonging. Her story was not just about a house, or a child, or a deed. It was about the extraordinary resonance of memory, the quiet power of forgiveness, and the eternal truth that love, in its myriad forms, always finds its way home.